It's January 9th, 2020 here in Australia, and I'm talking to L. Terry Chappell, MD, in my hometown of Bluffton, Ohio, on this fine summer day here and a winter day there. Terry, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jack.
Well, you're probably the most unusual person I'll interview because, A, you're in my hometown. My sister is behind the scenes in the camera and has worked for you for what, 25, 30 years? And
30.
30 years. I first heard of you, so I was supposed to come back and take over my dad's practice in Bluffton, which I actually considered doing in about 73 after I had a bad experience talking about a wellness center in Ashland, Oregon. They were so negative, I thought, the hell with it, I'm just gonna go open, join Dad in his practice. That clearly wasn't me. And about then is when you came to Bluffton, right?
Yes, we came continuously as of 78.
Oh, so there was a gap, yeah. And the first thing I knew, because Bluffton can basically support 2.5 doctors, the half being the retiring one, which was soon to be my father. So it was you and Rodoval probably. I think Soash had already retired. And first thing I heard was you were teaching a course at Bluffton College using my wellness workbook. I thought, what?
Yeah, best text I could find.
So, but let's go back even further to where you grew up and what made you decide to become a doctor, and besides that, becoming a very different doctor. And let's get to your roots. I don't even know where you were born.
I was born in South Haven, Michigan, southwestern Michigan.
Uh-huh. Is that near near the Gary, the tri-state area, or more up in?
No, it's about 80 miles up the coast of Lake Michigan, the eastern side.
Like Benton Harbor, Stevensville, that area?
No, north of Benton Harbor, between Benton Harbor and Holland.
Uh-huh, okay. And did you play doctor as a kid?
I don't remember. No, actually I did not, because people would ask me what I wanted to do when I was in school. And I told them, I really don't know, but I know one thing, I'm not going to be a doctor.
Well, that's interesting. What were your parents' backgrounds? And
my father was an attorney. He actually taught school first, and then during the World War II, he went to law school. And my mother was a speech and English teacher.
Ah. So then you went through school in, say the town again?
South Haven.
South Haven, okay.
So I get back once in a while.
Uh-huh. And so when did you went to college? Where was that?
Went to college at DePaul University with a W down in Greencastle, Indiana.
Right, Greencastle, that's where the courthouse has the tree growing out of it, isn't it? Or is that Newcastle?
I think that's Newcastle.
Yeah, we used to go through both of them when we drive down to Louisville.
Sure.
I know that area too. And what did you major in?
I majored in general science background, a pre-medical background. So it's a combination of sciences.
So you must have then decided to, when did you decide to go into medicine?
Well, they had an arrangement where a freshman would room with a senior. And that was a good one because actually I was placed with a senior who was a pre-med major. And he convinced me to give it a try, to try medicine.
Interesting. And what year was that?
I graduated in '65.
So what was it like partway through college or junior year? What?
No, it's the senior year.
Oh, your senior year. Okay. So then you applied to med schools and got into one, but
Got into University of Michigan. That's where I wanted to go. So I set the other applications aside and went to work.
so you were in Ann Arbor 4 years and then internship.
Yes, I married my wife. Big, big choice that was. I enjoyed that very much. And then we were in Ann Arbor for 4 years, like you say, and then I went out to Ogden, Utah, and interned out there.
Uh-huh. Well, now your wife was a classmate of my older sister's, which, how did you meet Bobby?
I met her at a anti-war march in Detroit.
Really? Huh.
Yes.
We're just watching Jane Fonda this morning on Colbert with her action Fire Drill Fridays in DC getting arrested. So
Oh, yes.
it's still at work. You're an early adopter. So you got married and went to med school, and then you interned where in Utah?
Ogden,
Ogden, okay.
St. Benedict's Hospital.
And then from there?
Then I did alternative service in Harlan, Kentucky, and also at prison for the criminally insane in Lima.
Oh, yes, good old Lima State.
That's right.
Yeah. So that got you to Bluffton then?
Got me. And we were in Bluffton for about 3 years, and then we went down to go back to the land in southern Ohio with two other couples. And we raised some animals, including cows, milking cows, but we were very poor at growing crops. We gave it a try, but we didn't do very well. I think we were the last county. But there's only two doctors, serve the whole county for giving babies, for delivering babies. And so that was quite an adventure.
So you were practicing there then?
Yeah, we were practicing in southern Adams County, southern Ohio.
Uh-huh.
But then after a few years there, we moved back to Bluffton because of the school system and because of church. We're involved with the Mennonite church.
Uh-huh. So did you grow up Mennonite?
No, I thought I didn't know anything about Mennonites, to tell you the truth.
Uh-huh.
But I found out through my wife's connections.
Uh-huh. So did you do any further general practice, family practice training?
No, I was able to get board certification by examination.
Uh-huh.
They let several of us through by that route when it was first available.
So I'm most curious how you became a weird doctor like all the other weird doctors that I know, and right there in Bluffton, no less, the last place I thought that could happen.
Well, actually, my wife taught Lamaze classes, and I got to see what you could do with the types of training that you got through Lamaze. And so that made it possible for me to think outside the box.
Interesting.
Then we looked for some other measures for relieving pain, including auriculotherapy. And
what kind of therapy?
Auriculotherapy.
Oh, okay.
Electropuncture. Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And I started going to meetings, and that's where I became weird.
Yeah, and you were like one of the weirdest of the weird in terms of the contributions you've made with chelation. So now when did you, I remember you first opened your center in an old house down there near the hospital.
Right. Yes. There's a couple of couches and a kitchen for the reception room, and I had a big desk that I got for sale from the prison, and into a bedroom, and we had a good time for a few years. And then I hooked up with a dentist, Dr. Weisenberger, and we decided to build a clinic, and that's what we did from there.
Now, how did you pick the name for your practice?
And so long ago, I don't remember, to tell you the truth. Do you remember?
You said Bobby came up with it.
Yeah, probably my wife did come up with that. We had been, before we moved back to Bluffton, we spent about a year and a half with Health on Wheels. And we drove around in an RV around the county, seeing in and out of the RV. That name was Health on Wheels. Celebration of Health came pretty close.
Health on Wheels. So for our viewers, the name of your practice is Celebration of Health Center, Clinic. I don't remember the last word.
Yeah, Celebration of Health Center Association it evolved to that. That's what it is now.
And you built that beautiful building down near the downtown area. For other viewers who don't know, Bluffton at that time had a population of under 3,000, but was blessed to have a college. So it was a very interesting place for me to grow up. It was a lot more, a thriving town compared to a lot of the dying farm towns around Ohio. And it had 2 blocks of business district, and you were right behind one of those blocks. And the thing I most remember is you put a swimming pool in the downstairs of your building, which my mother loved.
Which we did, but it didn't last. We didn't, we had it, I don't know how, maybe 3 years or something.
Something like that.
Yeah. We also had an exercise facility in the basement.
Right, before that was common. Yeah. Well, then I learned about you're doing chelation, which I had first, I met Gary Gordon down in Florida back in '75, I think it was. So I knew what chelation was. And here you were doing it in Bluffton. Wow. And then Dad had heart trouble and a bypass at Cleveland Clinic, and told my brother he thought he wanted to die, except for the fact that Dave gave him a foot massage in the intensive care. And he said that's saved his life. And then he came back and started doing chelation. And the story I remember was he had a carotid plaque, and they were following it in Toledo, a radiologist, and it dissolved with the chelation. And I always said, I wish I'd known this before I had that bypass. That's what I remember. But how'd you get into chelation? What was your entree into that?
Well, there's a gentleman who was head of a corporation in Lima, and he had employees that were driving all the way to West Virginia to get chelation.
Oh.
And he decided that didn't make sense. So he started bugging me about getting chelation, and I, of course, said, "Well, if it were any good, I know I would know it by now." So I put him off, and after about 2 years of that, he finally convinced me at least go to a meeting and see what it's like. And did that, and then visited a couple of docs who were giving it in the area. And the amazing thing was talking to the patients, because the patients were doing fantastic, far above what I was used to seeing. So that got me into it more, and I started going to seminars and learning more and more about it, as well as other nutritional things.
And then you wound up doing that meta-analysis, in the 80s? That was a landmark.
That was in the early 90s, yes.
Oh, okay. And I'm trying to remember what was 86% objective improvement rate that you found?
You're very close. It was 87.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that always stuck with me, like, wow.
Yes.
So,
Exciting and a very wonderful time. Meet a lot of people that were really devoted to helping others
yeah,
and doing things that really work, you know. So that is I was very fortunate to get that group of people to help.
yeah, I was impressed at the meeting I went to in Florida. I met Bill Gray there and Gary Gordon, and I think Atkins was there, and that was an eye-opener for me to meet a bunch of weird docs, and before I even opened my wellness center. So now, at some point, you picked up Bob Angus. How did he come on the scene?
Where do we meet Bob?
Dr. Kindness.
Oh, sure. Dr. George Kindness was helping us with some laboratory work, and he met Bob in Chicago, and that was not working out, and I happened to be handy, and he said, okay, I'll come. And we had a good relationship for many years. He was a really great spirit and very big help to me.
And then he wound up marrying my sister.
Yeah, that's right.
Keep it all in the family. So then you got very active in the Great Lakes. I never can remember the full name of the Great Lakes organization.
Well, it's okay because it changed its name a couple of times.
Right.
International College of Integrative Medicine, now ICIM.
That's the current name.
Yes.
And you were president of that for some time and helped bring it back from near extinction.
Well, yeah, and Betsy and Bob served as leaders of the organization from a financial point of view, and they kept it going. So that was a very good inspiration. And that now my daughter is the executive director of that organization, and that's been a great working experience for me.
Yeah.
Yes, I was president of ACAM for one term and several terms for ICM.
Now ACAM is the more national one?
Yes, American College for Advancement in Medicine.
Yeah. And I was a charter member of the American Holistic Medical Association, which then changed its name that I can never remember. I think it's American Academy of Integrative Health or something. I'm about to interview Bill Manahan about that next week. So have you any connection with them?
I went to a couple meetings, but I didn't get too involved with them.
I met Norm Shealy early on. In fact, we were on a program down at Wayne State, and that was what gave my dad some legitimacy for me, is when he came to one of the talks and saw that I wasn't the only weird doctor. So now you've done a number of other innovative things at the center. I know one of them is the breast thermography, and to me, mammography is a huge fraud, inflicting a lot of damage with not very much good, and completely enmeshed in the American belief system. So how's that been, and how did you first get into thermography?
Well, we first got it through Huckstra, and Phil Huckstra is one that reads thermography, and he's been at it. His father was at it before him, and was still reading thermographies, and he's out in California now, but he transmits films back and forth so he can continue to work. I think that I agree with you very much. mammography is fraudulent. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, and the radiation, not to mention the pain and the false positives and the number needed to treat and all that stuff that is ignored by the grandfathering in. So what other, I know Bob was doing ultrasounds of joints. There's another term for it. Dopplers, yeah. Are you still doing that?
No. Bob was doing, actually it was Doppler for measuring circulation in the legs.
Right.
But that machine finally gave out on us, and we weren't using that up to speed, so we stopped that.
Well, let's go back to chelation a little bit longer, because I'm realizing that many of our viewers probably never heard of it. But sodium EDTA, which we used in chemistry lab, and I remember tall columns of it, and we would run stuff through it. But chelation is binding molecules inside a cage of another molecule, which is sodium ethylene diamine trichloroacetic acid. Is that right? Something like that.
Yeah. Good.
EDTA. I was a chem major. and they discovered it in Michigan, wasn't it? Where they were treating people with, was it mercury or lead poisoning in some factory?
Yeah, it was in Detroit.
Yeah.
And they first started using that to treat circulation about 1956, I think it was.
But I thought what they were treating was heavy metal poisoning, and they discovered that the people with claudication could suddenly walk farther. And that's when they figured out that it was doing more than just the heavy metals. But I don't remember if it was lead or mercury or what. I think it was was it fluorescent tubes or something they were building that was exposing them to some heavy metal?
It was lead. Yeah,
Lead. Yeah. And who, you know, I remember Gary Gordon was one of the earliest proponents, and I'm going to track him down and interview him too. But in case I don't, it picked up in what, late 70s, 80s? When did it spread?
It was picking up in about the time that ACAM was formed, which was the early 70s.
Yeah.
But then that's also the time when cardiac surgery started to become popular. And a lot of people moved away from chelation when that happened. And then they became controversial, where the doctors who provided it were under attack for giving these treatments that really were helpful.
Yeah, it's a classic follow the money because no one can patent sodium EDTA. There's no big bucks to be made off selling it. So the big bucks to do the kinds of normal studies for drugs that only the pharmaceutical companies can fund, that's a problem, though the VA is somewhat getting around that. And so this flies in the face of big pharma, as well as the surgeons who are making big bucks on cabbage, and which there isn't any real good data to support that, is there? They continue to do it, but
you're right. Both chelation and the surgery for stents and so forth are classified in level B, which is actually a fairly decent classification, but it wasn't sought that way. It wasn't followed through that way. And chelation became outlawed, virtually outlawed in several places. I got involved in a number of hearings at medical boards in the United States as well as in Denmark. I testified before the Danish Supreme Court about
really,
chelation.
As an expert witness, then.
As an expert witness, right?
Well, Well, and then your meta-analysis must have lended some weight to the effectiveness of it, but I'm
Yeah.
guessing that got buried.
Yes, it got buried pretty much. But it put together all the studies that had been done and that could refer to the number of patients and how they did individually. And so it was a lot of work, but conventional medicine really started using meta-analysis at that point. So it was helpful in a number of the hearings that we had.
And you had 20-some studies, as I recall, with how many thousand people?
It's 19,000. Right.
And an 87% objective improvement. So how often do you get that with most conventional treatments?
Not very good. But
And still people don't want to hear about it. And it's like thermography. Now, were you personally persecuted or have any troubles with doing chelation there in Bluffton?
I had a hearing, yes, and what we did is we sued the medical board because we felt they didn't have grounds for a hearing at all.
Great.
And we didn't win the suit, but we did win the standing, in that they were told that they ought to have legislation to protect this type of treatment in the state of Ohio. And we were able to get that. We had a couple of very courageous legislators that came and sat with us, and they set up a law stating that chelation and other alternative medicines should be legal in the state of Ohio. So we haven't had too much trouble here from that. But we did in other states. California was a big one. And we had a hearing before the medical board. I think there were about 30 members of the medical board, and we saved chelation by one vote in that.
In California?
In California.
Yeah. Wonderful. Now,
And,
you know Len Saputo? He knows of you.
I know his name. I don't know him well.
We have some background noise here. Somebody turn on the vacuum cleaner. Got to get turned off. I don't have a professional office like you to operate out of. So that's fascinating. How many states is it legal or are protected? Is it a majority or?
Well, now it's a big majority. There's only a couple states that disallow it. But part of that, the big reason was there was a legislator in Indiana who whose child was her grandchild had autism and was pretty much cured from his autism with the chelation.
Interesting. I hadn't heard of that.
Yes. So he saw to it that we had a hearing in Congress on chelation. And I testified in that hearing. That was scary because we had the bigwigs from the health and services.
I'll bet. When
But
was that?
that was in the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And so they actually funded a study for chelation at that point. And one very courageous doctor, Dr. Tony Lamas from Florida, said that he would do the study. And that's a big crossover double-blind study. And he proceeded and did it and found out that there are a lot of challenges in doing a study on chelation from the opponents, but he did it. And he finished the study in about 2003. And big surprise. The study was positive. It showed that people who had chelation therapy did much better than those who did not.
That was the VA study.
No, this is skipping ahead to the funded study by Congress. The VA study was back in the 60s, and that failed because of the Persian War. Sent all the doctors across the ocean. So that one failed. But the one I'm talking about is the one that was funded by Congress. And it was a 30.
No idea. Huh.
That's the TACT trial, the trial to assess chelation therapy. And that was positive.
Uh-huh.
Shockaroo to the physicians at the National Convention when this was presented. But they said, well, that's interesting. Now you have to do another one because one not enough, you know. They didn't say that beforehand. So the second study was formulated, and that's in place now. But they need another 400 patients to complete the study, I understand.
Well, as it was Max Planck who said that science progresses one funeral at a time. So
That's
hopefully if future generations will look back at the laughability of all of these things that we're doing, like we look back on bloodletting and using arsenic for what was it for syphilis, mercury or something toxic, all various things. So I've been in wellness, which we didn't treat, diagnose, or prescribe, but I've been connected and close to many people like you and Len Saputo and Larry Dossi and Norm Shealy and, you know, parallel tracks. And I've had a particular interest in infant circumcision, vaccination, and water fluoridation as three huge areas that the public is completely misinformed on. And the change, you know, changing a culture that's so embedded in beliefs that have no science behind them, it's difficult. So what has been the hardest thing for you in terms of, or have you had any difficulties in Bluffton there with your practice, and how did Rodabaugh respond, and who else are practicing there now? I don't even know who came after you.
There's probably a good half a dozen doctors in town now. Pediatric practice.
Wow.
Hospitals have sent out satellite clinics that to try to get part of the action, I guess. But they do a good job, and that's fine. I don't go to the hospital. Most of the doctors, the family doctors, don't go to the hospitals anymore. Treat people as an outpatient. And it's a different atmosphere than it was back then.
Yeah. Have you found acceptance or disinterest or any resistance to your weirdness?
I would say a little bit more in the disinterest category. Haven't had too many people that have stopped by or whatever, but no hostility either. It's been pretty good. That's fine with me.
And you're still running the chelation clinic?
Yes, I am, indeed.
I think there's a social factor to that probably is important too. Like when Dean Ornish found out that the support groups were as important, if not more, than diet. And my belief is that currency wellness is connection. And I've often thought, you know, seeing your clinic set up and the big fancy reclining chairs and people sitting around getting to talk to each other for a couple hours, that in itself has some therapeutic effect. but I'm glad to know it's still going.
Yes, it is.
How many patients do you have currently you're chelating, just roughly?
Boy, I don't know how many. But I will say that we have 14 chairs, so we can treat as many as 14 at one time.
How many days a week do you run it?
Run it to, well, 2.5 days a week.
Uh-huh. Interesting. So you've got chelation, you had Doppler blood flow. I remember Bob did that for me, what, 20, 25 years ago. Breast thermography, and I remember they did live blood analysis when I was there, whatever it was, 25 years ago. Are you still doing that?
No, that was something that Bob did years ago. But, and that was a controversial treatment that we decided not to continue with anyway, because of being afraid that it might be considered unlawful or something. But then it's faded away, and recently it started to come back a little bit, but we don't do it ourselves here.
I was only aware of it as an analytic technique. I wasn't aware of a treatment component to it. So what was that?
No, it was analytic, as you said. We had live blood cells and how they interact with other blood components.
I remember being impressed at the rouleau patterns I was seeing in my own blood.
Yes, right.
I know they're doing it here in Mullumbimby at the herb shop, I think. But then what do you do about it? I mean, it's telling you you're not in balance, and I guess they can sell herbs or whatever. But I wondered whether it was still going strong or not.
Not strong, but there's a few practitioners using it across the country.
Now, have I missed any other alternative treatments that you either done or are still doing?
We do quite a bit of prolotherapy.
Oh, right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that I've forgotten that you did that. That impressed me when my friend Jeff Patterson first turned me on to it 20, 30 years ago. And he was training docs at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there was a doctor in Santa Rosa who said, he quit his other practice. He said, my patients get such benefit and they love me for it. Why would I want to do anything else? Was that your experience too?
Pretty much so. Pretty much so.
And for our viewers who may not know what prolotherapy is, it's injecting, what were you using, a glucose solution or what, various things?
Solution or concentrated saline solution. And what you do is you inject small amounts, less than a drop, where the ligaments attach to the bone in multiple little injections. And that creates a little irritation that the body thinks is a fresh injury. So it sends out cells called fibroblasts, and they lay down new ligament tissue like a fresh injury. And you do that every week or so. I do it every week. Some doctors do it less frequently. And you do it repetitively until the joint becomes strong again. And then it's oftentimes just as good as new, if not better. So it's a pretty exciting treatment. Some of the orthopedists do a different version of it. Instead of prolotherapy, they call it PRP, or platelet-rich plasma. And they inject the patient's own plasma, which is more complicated, but we don't do that here.
They get similar results?
They're similar, yeah, but not as it's cheaper to do the prolotherapy, and the results are similar. Yeah.
You say it's cheaper?
Or
not?
It is per session. It is, to my knowledge anyway. I don't do the PRP stuff. I'm not familiar with it.
Interesting. Yeah. And you've had similar wonderful results from people that love you for it.
Very happy people with that, right?
Yeah. It's an amazing under the radar, obvious, far less invasive treatment than back surgery. And again, big pharma doesn't want it.
That's true, and it's interesting that prolotherapy and chelation are two treatments that are specifically not covered by Medicare.
Yeah.
And they would save Medicare a whole lot of money if they would.
A whole lot of money. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet circumcision is covered by Medicare. In fact, we're suing some of the states. There's a process in Boston. They're going to sue. Actually, that would be Medicaid in Boston. We call it Medi-Cal in California. It's so political.
Yes.
So any other things besides prolotherapy that I've missed?
We've been doing neurofeedback treatments. It's been around for a while, but we've been doing it for the last few years. And it's a treatment where you place a wire around the head and attach it just lightly. And then it detects the brain waves in the brain and then corrects abnormalities. And that's been a really exciting treatment with for headaches as well as depression, anxiety, with oftentimes long-term results after relatively few treatments. That's been really exciting lately.
Interesting, because I was doing it back in the 70s when it was still called biofeedback, but we were doing mainly hand temperature, forehead EMG, and skin GSR, because the EEGs at that point were so difficult to get good electrode contact. You'd spend half the session trying to get contact. But I know that's advanced considerably, and the name changed to neurofeedback, and I'm going to interview Eric Pepper, who was one of the early biofeedback guys, and try to get up to date on that too. So I didn't know you were doing that. Great, you're just right out front still, Terry.
We don't want to get bored, that's for sure.
So, do you do any conventional treatment alongside all of these alternatives? I'm not sure how broad your practice is with
Yeah, we do some conventional medicine. If there's a good chance that the conventional medicine is going to do better than the alternative, then yeah, we go that way. But
do you have people that just come in and use you as their regular GP, or are they pretty specialized with pain or things that you'd use the special treatments for?
It'd be pretty unusual for somebody not to have any interest in alternative treatment at all. That's what we specialize in, and that's what people oftentimes come mainly to get that alternative treatment rather than try to convince their doctor to do something like that outside.
Interesting. Well, I'm about out of questions. If you have any other angles that I've missed to bring in.
How's your writing coming? Anxious, your next venture.
Well, this is it. I've undertaken this oral history of wellness as part of a documentation of my wellness center. And I started out with a couple dozen people, and now it's over 250 people when I expanded it into alternative integrative medicine. And I'm going to do a whole section on intactivism because I've been very involved with the anti-circumcision movement. And I've got a dozen or more pioneers in that. So I'm I've switched from writing to interviewing, and I still edit things, but we're not going to do another edition of the Wellness Workbook. It's just too much work. And
It's that work.
yeah,
It's a huge work.
pardon?
That was a big contribution to alternative medicine at a very important time. So thank you very much for all of us that benefited from it.
Well, I'm without people like you giving me feedback, I wouldn't have known, because they just disappear. We've sold probably 250,000 copies, but in the 3 editions. But it's petering out now. Our royalty checks are dwindling to a few hundred twice a year. So I think it's dying a slow death. I would like to have Betsy stick her head in behind you there. Just we've heard your voice, but get my sis on camera. You there, Betsy?
I'm coming.
Okay, good. This is my kid sister. I remember when she was born. You're 13 years younger, and you have been Terry's left-hand woman, I guess. Been there for 30 years and managed all kinds of things, both administrative and clinically. And do you have anything to add from what you've heard?
No, I can't think of anything other than when you were talking about his patients, they really want to come because they don't want all the medications. They want more natural treatments as with supplementation.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and Bluffton has always been a center for alternatives. I remember seeing the signs out in the country, do not spray NFA, was the National Farmers Association, and they were trying to stop spraying of weeds along the side of the country roads. And, you know, with the Mennonite influence and a lot more healthy interests in Bluffton than most small Midwestern towns. So you've picked a great spot to locate. And you've got that big health food store down in the center of town that used to be a drugstore, didn't it? Wasn't it Houndstein's drugstore?
I don't even remember that, John.
That was before my time.
Really? Yeah. Well, Armand Houndstein was a pharmacist and also an organist at the Presbyterian Church. But yeah, that's where it was, on the corner. So that's a really beautiful symbolism of how things have evolved in Bluffton. And thanks to you being a hotbed of integrative medicine right there in Bluffton. So
yeah.
Any parting words to our viewers down the line? Who knows who's gonna watch this?
Carry on. I am concerned about the planet kind of falling apart. And, and the alternative things that need to be done to make that bring that forward, save it.
Yeah, I'm hoping that people back or down in the future watching this will realize that this was a crucial time and we did turn it around. Otherwise, they probably won't be watching it, because it's what they're called. There was a term I heard just this morning. Jane Fonda used it of is it climate trauma or climate something? The sickness caused by the climate change threat that people are feeling. And here in Australia, we've got fires. They're estimating 1 billion animals have been killed. I just saw that this morning, and fires that have 4 million acres so far. And the smoke is incredible in Sydney. Up here, the rains on Christmas put it out, but it's probably just the beginning of what's going to be unfolding unless we turn it around. So, well, thank you both for spending the time with me, and my best.
Same to you. Thanks a lot, Jack.